Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for this Cleveland Cavaliers offseason preview after what was a really good season for this team. So if you're a Cavaliers fan, there is a lot to look forward to moving forward in the future. I know the season didn't end the way you guys wanted it to, but don't just focus on the end result. Focus on the entire process and how the season went. 51 wins is just absolutely incredible. So hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more in the future as we get into this Cavs offseason preview. This was heavily requested on the channel, and I'm very excited to be bringing it finally, going through all of these teams, getting through every single offseason preview, the amount of work that goes into each video. I don't want to just rip them off and, kind of just jump into them and just throw together lazy work. I want to make sure I'm spending the adequate amount of time on each team and prepping each team for me to be able to talk about them in a 25 to 35 minute video. And for the Cavaliers, obviously watched a lot of their games this season, watched a lot of Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, and all of their key players as well. So I'm excited for this video. I hope you guys are as well. So let's jump into it with our video preview. The season recaps where we're starting the thing off, just like we do in all of the offseason previews. You have to know where the team is to figure out where they have to go next, and that's really the most important part of the video. So we're going to spend quite a bit of time on that one, and then going forward we're going to look at the Cavaliers draft situation. A lot of people who maybe aren't big time Cavs fans are going to say, what draft situation? They traded a lot of those picks for Donovan Mitchell. They also currently owe a pick for Karis LeVert. So how do they have draft picks? What does that look like? We'll discuss a different level of draft pick situation for Cleveland, different than a lot of the other teams we've discussed so far, but I still think it's very worth mentioning for this team. Then we'll go into NBA free agency, the cap room that they have, some of the exceptions that they could look to bring players in on. And then we'll also talk about some of their own pending free agents and how that could potentially look to shape up this team and really move some of the pieces around. We'll also go into some of those free agent targets that they could add using some of those exceptions and maybe some of that cap space we mentioned. We'll also then get into trade targets for this team, which I think is a very fun place to look for Cleveland, and just a completely different form of topic for what I think a lot of Cavs fans are probably currently considering. And then when it also comes to how we're going to conclude this video, we're going to end with an early outlook, which I'm very excited about for this Cavaliers team for a few different reasons. Because one, they're young. Second, yes, it was just a disappointing end to the year, but we're not going to focus on that too much. We're going to focus on internal progression for this team and how they look to get better going forward. So let's talk about this past season, and we'll just recap kind of some of the key things I saw. 51-31, fourth in the Eastern Conference, and this is the first time since I believe 1996 that the Cavaliers made the playoffs without LeBron James. That was before I was born, which is absolutely incredible. That's very good work by the Cavaliers. Obviously, losing in 5 games is very tough and not really the thing that you want to have happen following such a good season for a bunch of good key young players on your roster. But at the end of the day, you still have to feel good about the work that they put in, the direction this franchise is headed. They have most of their key guys locked in and really as staples of the franchise for years to come. And I think one really impressive element, and this was something I knew they were going to be good at last offseason, and a lot of people, I remember I live streamed when they made the trade for Donovan Mitchell. There was a lot of questions about their defense, and I said, whoa, don't worry about the defense. I know that they've got 2 small guards, which was most people's concern. I also said, hey, they have 2 awesome front court players who are going to clean up a lot of the inconsistencies that small guards can present, which is rim paint, defense, and just protection around the rim in general. Well, they have one of the most transcendent defensive players at his age in the NBA in Evan Mobley. Very fantastic defensive player. Jared Allen also defensively. He's one of those traditional rim bigs where he's going to put pressure on the rim on offense. He's going to protect it on defense. And those 2 guys, I think, have been vitally important for the Cavaliers building what was the best defense by net rating, by defensive rating in the NBA this past season. So let's jump into Donovan Mitchell here. Averaged over 28 points a game, had a fantastic year. I think the most memorable moment for him this season was scoring 71 points in a single game. Absolutely incredible. Just otherworldly scoring. And I know people are going to discredit it and say, oh, well, yeah, not in today's NBA. That doesn't. Yes, it does. Okay. Otherwise, we'd be seeing people score 70 points like 8 times, 10 times, 15 times a year. It doesn't happen, really. It really does not. And the fact that he went off for 71 is just remarkable. Something that I'll never forget where I was when it happened. And I'm sure a lot of Cavs fans who are watching it live will never forget that moment either. And it's honestly such a great memory for Cavs history. He's now the all-time leading scorer for a single game in Cavs history, which is absolutely remarkable. But even outside of that one game, he just provided key shot making for the Cavaliers this season. And I think it was a really nice positive year one for Donovan Mitchell, specifically when we talk about the regular season that he had. Then we transitioned into Garland, who, sacrificed a little bit of what his potential individual role could have been, but it was definitely for the betterment of the team as we saw them win 50 plus games this year, which is a very tough mark to hit, and one that I don't think that they hit without Donovan Mitchell, which is a big testament to Darius Garland and some of the young guys' maturity levels on this roster. I think it's a team that wants to win. I think it's a team that's willing to sacrifice some of their own individual statistics. Could Garland have come into this year and said, no, I want to average 27 points a game myself, and I want to try and push for an all-NBA candidacy and try and be the guy? And I think that he has the talent to potentially be that at some point, but he was completely A-okay with playing in kind of a Batman and Robin type of duo between Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland in terms of who's going to take some of the late shots. Garland did it some games, Mitchell did it other games. I felt like they flowed off of each other pretty well, honestly, for their first year. There was obviously some hiccups along the way in terms of your turn, my turn a little bit. I think that they still have to work out some of those kinks, but it was just the first year that we saw them together. There's going to be more time to build some of that consistency, that continuity between them that will hopefully take their offense to the next level next year, which is really a big issue for this team. I think is just offensive creation, offensive ability to score the ball consistently and to play the right way around each other. And that's where I turn my eyes to Evan Mobley, who I think is a fantastic young player, one of the better young players in the league, and somebody I'm currently holding a lot of stock in. I think that Evan Mobley is a build-around type of player, not necessarily going to be an MVP of the league, but could he be a defensive player of the year at some point? 110% he could be. In fact, I would almost bet on it, the fact that he will be at some point. He's that special defensively. Someone I really liked when he was coming out of his draft, and I probably didn't even like him enough, honestly, with how good he's been in the NBA. I think the one concern, though, is he going to be a power forward long term, or are some of the shooting limitations going to maybe prohibit him to being more of a center? And what does that look like? Are the Cavaliers better if he plays center long term? I think that's a big question this team's got to figure out, because that's one of the big notes I've taken away from this year. Rookie year, Evan Mobley was fun. Sophomore year, you trade for Donovan Mitchell, and all of a sudden all these expectations start to skyrocket, and all of a sudden there's a lot more media pressure on you. There's a lot more eyes looking at you, and there's not time for a letdown in a sophomore season. I don't think Evan Mobley had a letdown year. I think some people in media will proclaim it that way. I just think a lot of people were expecting a bigger offensive step forward, and realistically, the perimeter shot making just hasn't come fully around yet. That was one of my concerns about him coming in out of USC. I think that there's still a lot of talent there, and he's got that mid-range down pat. So it's just about continuing to work on his range, taking a few more steps out and getting those reps in during the offseason. I'm not going to bet against Evan Mobley. I think he's got the talent. I think he's the type of player that I would want to build around in terms of an offensive defensive hybrid who can defend multiple positions, protect the rim. There's just not very many players like him in the league, which is what makes him so special. And then that turns our attention to Jarrett Allen. And based on my question earlier about is Evan Mobley best suited to be a center long-term, it makes you wonder if Cleveland at some point could potentially consider moving off of Jarrett Allen, which I'm not saying that they should. And this is really preliminary here. This is not any type of, they're going to do it this offseason or anything like that. But I think that there might be a little tiny seed that the Cavs front office, Kobe Altman, is going to think about just a little bit this offseason. Again, they're not going to make any drastic moves here. They're not really in a position to do so. But I think that's going to be one long-term piece of information I really want to keep my eye on, because first of all, if I'm another team in the league, I would love to get my hands on Jarrett Allen. I think he's a really, really solid big man in today's NBA with the way that he can screen and roll. He's got really good feel as a downward roll guy. Now, I know a lot of people just think, oh, well, being the screen and roll guy is probably the easy part. It's really actually challenging. The amount of concentration you have to be a nice lob finisher and a guy who can roll on time. There's just such a feel to it. And if you've ever played basketball, if you're a ball handler, you probably realize that some roll guys you just work better with and some of them you don't. And that's because of the roll man's depth and the ability to get downhill in a timely fashion, but also give you a nice big lob threat and somebody who's got good, strong hands to actually catch the basketball. Jarrett Allen's got all of those things. Jarrett Allen's a really, really good big man. Plus, he protects the rim. Again, he's not going to shoot the ball, and defensively out in the perimeter is not something you want to see all the time out of him. But I think there's enough versatility here that I'm not saying I'd give up on Mobley at the 4 right now, because I think that's really, if they can figure out their wing position, that's really the big answer for me. Is teams are going to have struggles matching up with Mobley and Allen. And if they can find a little bit more creativity on offense from JV Bickerstaff, which is one of my main complaints about him this year. So I just think they need a little bit more ingenuity. I think a little bit more creativity in terms of where they're lining their guys up on the court. I think that their dunker spot utilization could be better. I think that they could put Evan Mobley on more short rolls and let him be a decision maker in the middle of the floor, with Allen putting pressure on the backside of the rim. There's a lot of things I think that they can still do at this point. Not saying that they haven't done some of those things already, but I think that there's more creativity, more ingenuity to find yet that they haven't fully explored at this point. But they've got time going forward. But the real big question, and this is the big question around the whole team, of course, the media is going to jump on this. Who is the long-term small forward of the future? You've got some options. Karis LeVert, who they traded for a year ago. I didn't love it when they traded for him. I'm not a Karis LeVert guy. Now, he did shoot the ball very well from 3 this year. I don't think he had a bad season, but I see him more as like a bench spark plug type of, he can go in and get you some buckets, and in some games he's going to be completely off, and he's probably one of the lesser consistent players in the league. And for some reason, people always talk about consistency as a trait. It's not a trait. Consistency has nothing to do with, oh, well, this guy's consistent, this guy's not, because there's something ingrained in them that makes them consistent. It's all about talent. The guys who are the most consistent are the most talented. Look at LeBron James and his scoring streak of 10 plus points in a game. It's because he's been the most talented player in the league during that duration. And because of that, he's able to assert his talent over top of the other people. And if there's games where people fade away, it's because, oh, their talent level is not shining through based off of this type of defensive set, this type of defensive personnel, this person's defending him this way. All of those things are what affect consistency. And if you have a super high talent level, you overcome those things, which is, I think, just a little side rant that I wanted to explain here. But on top of that, you have some of those other question marks. Again, I don't think LeVert's the long-term small forward. I think they probably re-sign him this offseason. We'll talk about that later. But Isaac Okoro, there was a lot of hopes for him emerging. I knew that some of the shooting limitations would still rear its ugly head, because when you have the quartet that you do of Mitchell, Garland, Mobley, Allen, really the 5th guy on the floor just needs to be able to knock down open shots and hustle. And it sounds really, really simple, and it sounds like I'm really dumbing it down. I'm not. When you have that talented of a grouping of guys who can handle the rock, protect the rim, be screen and roll guys, and just rebound the basketball, which was an issue for Cleveland against New York that they need to clean up, obviously. They just need to find ways to be more productive there, and I think also just having more athleticism would help there as well. Right now, they just don't have a lot of guys who are three-point shooting capable players that don't also prohibit the amount of size that they can have on the court. Because right now it almost feels like, okay, you have to play LeVert at the 3, and then you're a little small and you don't match up very well with some teams, which kind of hurts some of your defensive upside that you have with Mobley and Allen both on the floor. And then it starts to rear its ugly head too with having both Mitchell and Garland. That's one of the few times they run into issues. Obviously, Okoro's the good defensive answer, but he just doesn't knock down enough shots. Cedi Osman, a little bit of the opposite, knocks down some shots, but not as good of a defender. I know he's had moments this year where he played solid defensively. That's for most guys in the league. It's not like every bad defensive player doesn't have moments where they do some good stuff defensively. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in the NBA. But Cedi Osman, I think he's a good depth piece, but like, again, if Cleveland's goal is making it deep in the postseason, you need to find an upgrade here. And I don't want to diminish Levert, Okoro, Osman, or Dean Wade, who I also think is a very nice player. Obviously dealt with some injuries this year that kind of limited his season. I think changed how his season was playing out, because if he doesn't get hurt and he stays healthy throughout the year, I think Cleveland's season maybe even ends differently too, just because he was in such a rhythm prior to his injuries. Which I don't think got any attention through the national media, but probably should have, because Dean Wade's actually a good player. Like, the way I see it, though, is like Levert's your sixth man, Okoro and Osman can kind of be your seventh, eighth guy, and Dean Wade can be like your eighth guy as well. You have options then off the bench. They're really just missing a fifth guy. That's really what they're missing in my eyes. I think Donovan Mitchell's talented enough to be a number one scorer for a team in the postseason. We've seen massive outbursts from him before. I think that Mobley's going to continue to develop into this mega, like, freak player who just does everything right a lot of the time, and just gives you a variety of ways to not only score the basketball, but also to defend, both out in space and around the rim. Garland, a special talent, right? I don't have to spend too much time on those guys, but it is worth noting that I think this team is in a really good spot. And I think, obviously people are going to say, well, they traded all their picks and they got bounced in the first round. There's this whole like reductionist idea of, oh, well, if this team didn't do this one time, then they're screwed for the rest of history. That's not how basketball works. Remember the narratives in 2010 about Dirk Nowitzki, that he was too soft to win a title, and then 12 months later he's hoisting the Larry O'Brien trophy after beating a super team. Okay, there's all these narratives all the time that a team can't do this, a team can't do that, until they actually do it. And the thing is, you don't want to project that a team can't unless you have legitimately good basketball reasons. And to be honest, you look at the Cavs, they have a lot of the elements that you need to win. You have the primary score, you have the ball handling, you have the decision making, you have the rim protection. It's just they're kind of lacking shooting. And that's one thing that you can definitely find across the league in a variety of different ways. But there's some other good options out there as well. The key word for Cleveland for me is wings. And it could be a one-way wing. And what I mean by that is someone who either impacts the game offensively or defensively. If they go with the defensive-minded wing, I would like it to be someone who's a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger than Isaac Okoro. I think Okoro still has a role on this team, even if they go that direction. But my real preference for them would be an offensive-minded wing, someone who can shoot the basketball, knock down open shots. And those are rare. There's not a lot of 6'8", 6'9" guys in the league who are really good shooters that are available very often. And the reason for that is it's a premium position and it's a valued position across the league. Those guys just don't become available. Obviously, the preference would be two-way wings who can impact the game both offensively and defensively, but those guys are even more rare. And honestly, they're going to be hard to find for Cleveland, but I do think that there's some players out there that could help this team potentially if they make the right moves. First, let's start with their NBA draft situation. They do not have their own first or second round pick this year. So you might be saying, well, how are they going to get better? They do own the Warriors' second round pick. Now, that pick is going to be in the late 40s. And again, some people are probably rolling their eyes at this saying, oh, well, what are you going to find there? There have been plenty of good second round draft picks in the last 5 to 10 years. I think an example of a second round pick that's really starting to break out in the NBA this past season was one of his breakout years. Nick Claxton was a second round pick. There's a bunch of guys who've been high impact players in the league before that are good second round finds. And there's a couple options that I like here. I'm going to start with Jordan Walsh from Arkansas. The reason I'm starting with him, I think he's got a really sneaky pathway into being a long-term NBA player, like a 10 to 15 year player, because of his point of attack defense. He's somebody who can get low, stay low to the ground, and really get up on a guy and make him work and force him in a direction and can control the game to a certain extent that way. Now, am I going to rely on him 48 minutes a game? No. This is somebody who would be like a depth piece. But again, do I feel better about him guarding guys than Cedi Osman? Yes, I 100% do. Now, do you trade off some of that offensive upside? Yes. Jordan Walsh is more of an advantage attacker right now. He's more of a transition player, or in a 4-on-3 setting, 3-on-2, he can finish some plays. He doesn't really instill a lot of confidence on the offensive end of the floor as of right now. Can he maybe knock down open shots 3-4 years from now? Yes. Are the Cavaliers looking for that? Maybe not as much, which leads me to the second prospect I'd really like to highlight here, and that is Baylor Shireman, a guy that I really, really like not only in this draft, but I really love him for the Cleveland Cavaliers. My current draft comp for him would be someone like Joe Ingles, who we know has carved out a very good career for himself as kind of this secondary, tertiary playmaker who can handle the rock, run a pick and roll, and obviously knock down the long ball. Baylor Shireman does all of those things. He's a very intuitive player, very smart. You can tell the game has slowed down for him. He is a little bit older. But again, if you're Cleveland here, I think last draft showed that they weren't scared of taking an older prospect. They drafted Ochai Agbaji, who was a senior out of Kansas. Ultimately traded him, and I think now's a good time to point out that he would be an awesome fit onto this team. Ochai Agbaji would really have helped this Cavs team this year. But I do think Baylor Shireman can kind of step into a role that he'd be very productive and very helpful for the Cavaliers as well, probably off the bench. But honestly, within like a year or two, I think he'd be a starter for this team just with what they currently have and the way that I think their team would be best fit together. Baylor Shireman's the guy that could really step in there for me. I just like his overall feel. He's a very deep range shot maker. Used to be the guy for South Dakota State when he was a Jackrabbit. Pretty much the entire offense played through him. Then he went to Creighton. There was a little bit of an adjustment period, but he actually started to showcase some really good connector traits as well that I think would make him fit really well in Cleveland as like, oh, well, Garland or Mitchell have the ball. All of a sudden they drive and kick, and well, the ball lands in Shireman's hands, and all of a sudden, oh, he takes the ball on the drive and attacks a closeout and throws a lob pass up to Mobley because he's just got that type of creativity, that fluidity to him that I think would fit really well in Cleveland. And you'd pair him with a lot of length and athleticism that he's just not played with yet in his collegiate career. You know, Creighton had Ryan Kalkbrenner, who's a good big, but not to the level of a Jared Allen or a Evan Mobley in terms of athleticism. South Dakota State had nothing like what Cleveland has to offer, which is why I think that some of Shireman's talents would really be amplified in Cleveland, which is part of why I really love him here as a fit for the Cavaliers. I don't see it very likely to see this team move up into the first round. There are some guys definitely that would help them in that range, but Shireman, probably one of the steals of the draft in my eyes, just because even though the ceiling's not anything comparative to a star or anything like that, I just think that he's going to be a good NBA player for quite a while, which is what Cleveland really needs to be searching for in the second round this year. And if they can find a guy that plays on the wing like Shireman, it's going to fit out really, really well with this current roster. So going into free agency, they are projected to have $12.77 million in cap space, which isn't really enough to do anything with. And their first priority is going to be retaining Caris LeVert, who is headed toward free agency this offseason. They have cap holds on a bunch of different guys. Caris LeVert, Dylan Windler, Danny Green are a few examples. Obviously, Ed Davis, Robin Lopez as well. They've got cap holds on a bunch of guys. Isaiah Mobley, Evan's younger brother. Or older brother, excuse me, not younger brother, older brother. They've got cap holds on a bunch of dudes, and I think that some of those guys they're going to want to keep. I think Caris LeVert is really the main guy that they would like to have on their roster long term. They almost need to re-sign him because of the trade rules, and just the way that realistically, if they ever try to look to upgrade their roster via trade, Caris LeVert's going to have to be in one of those deals probably. But I do think free agency this offseason is a really interesting grouping of players that could help this team. Rui Hachimura, his role with the Lakers, I think has really played him into a better contract than I was initially expecting. I think he has a much clearer fit, a much clearer role in LA than what I was initially projecting. I think he's actually excelled in that role way better than I had originally anticipated. So I was clearly wrong on that. So I'm hoping to see him signed for like a tax pyramid level, something around $6 million. I'm sure his agent's going to think he's worth more than that. I just don't really know if there's that market out there for him though. Yuta Watanabe, if they could get him on the biannual exception at $4.448 million, I would really, really love that. I've been floating Yuta Watanabe to pretty much every single team just because there's not really a reason he doesn't fit anywhere. He's emerged as a very, very, very good corner shooter. Now, he doesn't give you a lot outside of that. He's not going to attack closeouts super great. He's not going to be a great above the break 3-point shooter. But I mean, for Cleveland, what are we looking for offensively? We're looking for a corner shooter here. We're looking for somebody to play off of Garland, off of Mobley, off of Allen, off of Mitchell, and to sit in the corner. And he does that. Plus, he's a really smart defender who's a really good rotation guy and is willing to step in, take charges when he has to. He's also someone who understands just overall defensive scheme. Found a lot of success playing in Brooklyn next to Kevin Durant. I think he was an underrated player in Toronto when he was playing for Nick Nurse up in the North. I think he had a really solid collection of games. Obviously, most notably, got dunked on by Anthony Edwards. But I think that, you don't get dunked on unless you're doing the right things defensively and rotating over and challenging shots at the rim like you're supposed to. So that's a credit to him, in my opinion. But then there's a fun little name here. And this doesn't, offensively, Cavs fans are probably already bawling their eyes out, maybe gouging their eyes out, honestly. But with Dillon Brooks probably having a significantly lesser market than was originally anticipated, especially after a poor postseason and the fact that the Grizzlies likely at this point are not interested in keeping him on their roster, as I had initially talked about in my Memphis Grizzlies offseason preview, well before the Shams Charania report came out on him. I think it's very interesting to me, a potential landing spot in Cleveland using that non-taxpayer mid-level exception. One of the reasons why is Cleveland is just really capped at ways trying to improve this roster. They don't have a lot of trade flexibility because of how many firsts they sent out to Utah. They don't have a lot of second round picks to trade, and they don't have a lot of middling contracts to move either. Signing somebody to the non-taxpayer mid-level exception should be a top-end priority this offseason for the Cavaliers, in my opinion, because it gives you a tradable contract later that if you wanted to pair that with Karis LeVert after you sign him using bird rights, you could maybe get up to that 2025, $30-ish million mark to maybe take in some other players in the future, change your depth around, move your roster pieces around a little bit. And that's where Dillon Brooks makes a lot of sense, not only from a trade standpoint, but also, hey, we're looking for a forward at all on this team. And I know Dillon Brooks, there's a lot of negatives to his game. I've been very vocal about them well before this season. I've never been a big Dillon Brooks guy at all. But at $12.2 million on the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, you're getting a starting level player. Somebody who, he's been a starter in the NBA for years on 50-plus win teams, and the Cavaliers basically could have a free chance to add to their roster without subtracting any pieces. And by the way, it's a guy who's played in a lot of playoff games. He's played in a lot of meaningful regular season games, a lot of meaningful regular season minutes, and it's at a premium position that you're looking to add. And it fits what you want to do defensively in terms of the physicality, gives you another perimeter defender that I think makes sense next to Mitchell and Garland. Like, I understand why there's going to be some initial pushback. He's a kind of a shot chucker, and I shouldn't say kind of, he's a shot chucker. He's also not a good three-point shooter. So some of the same issues are there, but I think one of the big undertones of that series against the New York Knicks, the Cavaliers got bullied, and they need somebody like Dillon Brooks. Now, I know that backfired big time against LeBron James and Anthony Davis. I'm telling you, the New York Knicks don't have LeBron James and Anthony Davis. Do you think it would have been beneficial for a guy like Dillon Brooks to maybe be matched up on Jalen Brunson and just, put his body on him a few times and say, yeah, you're a little bit smaller than me, Jalen Brunson? I do think there would have been some benefit to that. Now, again, is he a perfect fit here? No. But with Cleveland's optionality, it just almost feels like something that they have to consider. If they can get him around the mid-level exception and fit him into that, I just think it's a no-brainer for them in terms of adding a guy in, say, a 3-year contract. Opens trade flexibility down the road. If it doesn't work out, then it's not that big of a deal because you didn't have to give up anything to get him. You just use an exception. And realistically, like, out of all the options, he's one of those that I actually do like quite a bit for the Cavaliers. So going into some trade targets, obviously there's some players out there too that I think could make some sense for Cleveland if they chose to go this route and kind of shy away from the route of keeping Karis LeVert. And this would be probably through a sign and trade, if anything. Now, I'm not sure if all of these teams are going to have interest necessarily in Karis LeVert, but I do think that there's some ways that Cleveland could work something out here in a deal. Tim Hardaway Jr. was a player connected to Cleveland frequently throughout the regular season, somebody who there was some reported interest from the Cavaliers in acquiring THJ. Now, I understand why. He's a good perimeter shooter. He shoots with a lot of range, and there's never a shot that he doesn't see that he doesn't like. Tim Hardaway Jr. is a shot chucker too, to be honest, but he's a good shot chucker because he makes a decent amount of them, and the points per possession ends up pretty well. in your favor. Duncan Robinson's a really fun example here because I think that you can get him for really, really cheap. And what I mean by that is you might even get incentivized by the Miami Heat to take him. So if you're Cleveland and Miami's trying to open up some of their cap table this offseason, they're trying to open up, ways to keep maybe a guy like Max Strus, Gabe Vincent, who are both free agents. Are you willing to, if you're Cleveland, commit to taking in some of Duncan Robinson's contract here, which isn't great, but you might get a few second-round picks. You might even get a protected first with it. And if you do, not only are you adding an asset to your trade chest, but you're also getting a guy who fits. He would be instantly the best three-point shooter in terms of pure just, he's only a shooter type of player on the team. Obviously, I would argue that Mitchell and Garland are both more skilled than him as perimeter shot makers. But Duncan Robinson, he's hit a bunch of tough shots in his career. I think he would pair really, really well with Jared Allen as kind of a dribble handoff duo that right now they don't have a lot of that in their offense. I think, again, we're talking about creativity, ingenuity into their offense. Duncan Robinson, any type of movement shooter, but Duncan Robinson specifically with his willingness to run around the perimeter and cause a lot of havoc, it just opens up so many things, especially for a team that's heavily reliant on slashing and small guards to create shots for them. I think a 6'7" Duncan Robinson who can knock down perimeter shots does actually make some sense. Fournier, I don't really love here as an option. I included him because I think the Knicks would be willing to get rid of him. And if the Cavaliers feel like that's somewhat of an upgrade, I don't think it is myself. Evan Fournier is really bad defensively, but I think that, maybe the Cavs feel, Mobley and Allen behind him, we can kind of mask some of that, which maybe that's true. I wouldn't do it myself. I think the most premium candidate on this list would be Luke Kennard. That's like the dream scenario of, wow, we just landed the guy that we needed, because he is an absolute torch from behind the three-point line. Probably one of the best off-ball three-point shooters in the league right now. Obviously, guys like Steph and Clay are going to always hold those reins, but Kennard's three-point percentage speaks for itself. He's a prolific offensive player who can also put the ball on the deck a little bit, can run a pick and roll every once in a while, even though he's kind of scared to do so. It's kind of a weird career that Luke Kennard's had. Back in Detroit, his final year with the Pistons, he averaged like 16 points a game and 5 assists, was doing a ton of stuff for their offense. They weren't winning a ton of games, but he was like heavily involved and showed that he was a pretty capable player that I just think didn't have a lot of talent around him. But when he does have talent around him, it almost seems like he like shies away from playing in the way that he's capable of, which I don't love. But I think that for Cleveland, you're not asking him to do all of that extra stuff. You're asking him to knock down open shots, and Mitchell, Garland, Mobley are going to generate those for you, as well as Allen's presence around the rim as well is going to help open some of those things up. So moving into our early outlook, as you can tell, I still think the Cavaliers are pretty good. They've got 4 really great young players that I believe in, that I think are good NBA players in general. That's a really great starting point, and it's better than what most teams have. That's what most teams wish they had. You think about some of those young rebuilding teams, like currently where the Pistons and with where the Pistons are at, where the Rockets are at, all of these teams, the hope is that they turn into what the Cavs have, of like, wow, that's a really good player. That's an all-star level player, maybe an all-NBA player. They've got, defensive player of the year candidate type of situation. That's what a lot of these young teams really are aspiring to have, is what Cleveland currently does. But Cleveland doesn't have those draft picks because they had to go out and trade for Donovan Mitchell because they did not outright draft him, which is a different scenario altogether. It's not the exact same as what those young teams are looking at, because they have some of those picks coming in from other teams and so on and so forth. But ultimately, that's what those young teams are hoping to have on their roster in terms of actual players. But I think there's one concern here I have long-term about this Cavs team, and it's Donovan Mitchell and his free agency status. He's not under a super long contract here. And, if he was tied to the franchise for 5 more years at the time I'm recording this video, I'd feel really, really good about the direction of this team. But I do think that there is a little bit of flight risk. I did want to touch on that a little bit in this video. I'm not going to harp on it here, but I would be semi-pessimistic as a Cavs fan about an extension possibly getting done. I wouldn't be shocked if Donovan Mitchell tests out some free agency in a couple of years. But I do think that right now, going into next season, this Cavaliers team is going to be really good. I think they're going to win 50-plus games again. I think that they're going to advance in the playoffs, probably past where they did this year, because that mid-level exception is going to be a big opportunity for them to add some talent. Who knows, maybe they facilitate a sign and trade with Karis LeVert. maybe they just outright keep him and then try and trade him at the deadline. There's some options for this team to try and figure out what they want to do, but there's always a pathway here for a team like Cleveland to find a couple decent to good players that maybe fit their roster a little bit better. And I just hope that next year they kind of meet the playoffs with a little bit more toughness, a little bit more grit, and a little bit more, hey, we need to really step up and perform here and play the way that we're supposed to, just because I don't think the execution was at the level that it was at all regular season long, which is a disappointment for sure. But, it's still a good building block. And for a franchise in Cleveland that hadn't tasted postseason success without LeBron James in nearly 3 decades, it's a huge win for the franchise. And I still like where they're at long term. With all the key pieces that they have on their roster as it currently sits. Cavs fans, I hope you did enjoy this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more. Really do appreciate each and every one of you taking time to watch this video. It was a lot of fun to talk Cleveland Cavaliers basketball. I really enjoy watching this team. As you can tell, I'm very glowing about the future, specifically of Evan Mobley, a player who's really fun and fascinating for me to watch. I hope to see him take a big step forward going into year 3. I think he will. Cavs fans, I really hope you found this video not only informational, but also accurate and enjoyable. Again, if you did, make sure to leave a like. It lets me know I'm doing a good job here. Thanks again so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.